Just honored to be with you tonight, and usually when I do workshops I start out just a greeting. I'm a member of the Dakota Nation. I've been working with Indian issues for about 20 years now. Really honored to be up here with Ann. She said she'd keep me in line tonight. So, I used to teach junior high, so it's like everybody do this. Come on now, this is a group activity. Go like this. Go like that. Okay, one more time. Okay, you know what you've just done? You had your handouts, your overheads, and your PowerPoints. And so I got a lot of bad jokes like that.
So where's the Dakota Nation?
Dakota, we are in South Dakota, North Dakota, Minnesota, Canada, Montana.
Lakota or Dakota?
Dakota. We have Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota. And you've probably heard the word Sioux. That's the tribe, but that's a label. It means nothing. And, it's a label placed upon us by the French in Ojibwe. I'm a little Chippewa Cree too, or Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, depending. But one of the things we do at OPI is try and talk about what names tribes call themselves in their own languages, as opposed to like, anybody know what two tribes live on the Fort Belknap Reservation?
Assiniboine and Fort Assiniboine and
Sioux.
Sioux, isn't it?
No,
Assiniboine and Sioux?
No.
Gros-Ventre?
Gros-Ventre.
Oh, Gros-Ventre.
Gros-Ventre
Sorry.
means
Big
what in
belly?
French?
Big Belly?
Yeah, big belly. So how do the Gros-Ventre people, anybody know what they call themselves in their own language? Animi. And it means people of the White Clay, or people of the Falls. But they said about 200 years ago when White Clay people first met French fur trappers, they engaged in sign language, and these White Clay people were living by some waterfalls at that time when these fur trappers were coming through, and they said, "Who are you people?" in sign language, and Gros-Ventre people are Animi, thought to ask them where they were from, and so they make the sign for waterfall. Right down Gros-Ventre, big belly. And so there's names of tribes that we know that have nothing to do with the tribal language. It's like a French word. And so that's part of the work I do at OPI that's kind of fun, is teach people about words in the Dakota, Lakota, Blackfeet language, or Igmu Sapa, that's how you say black cat.
You can put him outside, Mike.
Okay.
I mean, I can't get him to go, but
Oh, no.
oh, come here, Bernie.
Well, I just want to say that when Bill asked me to do this and talk about the Indian Child Welfare Act and the details of the law, I was like, Mike Jetty has to do this with me because way more entertaining, the stuff is way more interesting and actually relevant to what you're going to do, I think, than trying to tell you, have you learn about the details, the intricacies of the law. I will talk about that a bit, but really the county attorney, others are going to get down the nitty-gritty of the act, and so what Mike tells you about the culture and then things to be aware of and things to think about, it's going to be way more, like I said, relevant to what you're going to be doing actually with these families. And I'm surprised that you're up that high, because even 10 years ago we really didn't have that many Indian kids in the foster care caseload. And we are not, as you know, near a reservation like so many of our other communities, and partly that's why we didn't have the caseload, but wow, we do now. So this is even more relevant than I thought. So what we're going to do, Mike and I both have had about an hour's worth of stuff that we've done in other presentations, and we have an hour total, so we have not done this together. We're going to
play jazz.
Make it work. He has this lovely PowerPoint, and I didn't bring handouts. I know that you got a handout that Elroy Potts did previously. I'm not going to follow that, and so you'll just have to mostly listen to us, and please ask questions, engage with us, because that's how we all learn from each other.
One thing you should know about Ann, though, she's so smart, it only takes her half an hour to watch 60 minutes. But I like to use a lot of cartoons when I do teaching and workshops, and when you look at this cartoon, two kids walking home from school, one kid says, "Really, you don't look like an Indian?" And I use that just to start out with. When you think about Indians, what kind of images come in your mind, and you'll work with native kids that are blonde-haired and blue-eyed, or red-hair, or different tribal nations. I'm a little Dakota, I'm also a little Chippewa and Cree and some French, and so you'll interact with some multicultural native kids, and just to keep that in mind too. You're actually meeting the intent of our state constitution by doing this, and thanks Bill and Casa crew. You know, we're the only state out of the 50 that has it written into our state constitution that we will teach about Indians. And that's really what drives the work I do at OPI. And we have this in place. It's one of the main parts of my job. It says every Montanan will be encouraged to learn about Indians in a culturally responsive manner. And cost because of your student population or the population you will work with. You have a high number of Native kids, and so how do you be culturally responsive in the work that you do with those children? And just to give you another cultural example, in the Dakota language, the word for children is wakanja. Wakanja means children, and the literal translation of that word is they're sacred beings. And that's why it's like it's the work I do. It's like if we could get back to some tribal traditions and ceremony and language components and culture and really acknowledge and celebrate that and get back to some of those roots, I think Indian country will heal itself up. But it's going to take it'll take some time. And that's part of what drives what I do. So now we're going to jump into the law stuff right away.
All right.
So, but I've got some more Indian Ed for all things to.
Yeah, we'll come back and forth.
We'll come back to that.
So,
back up.
okay, and Mike cut these slides, as you see, from the National Indian Child Welfare Association, and I mean, put the next one, please, and then I'll kind of use this, and then I will fill in a bit. But a quote that is not there, and you just mentioned this, Mike, there's no resource that is more vital to the continued existence and integrity of Indian tribes than their children. And that's from U.S. Congress. And what led up, or what was going on in this country prior to the Indian Child Welfare Act that was passed in 1978 was, as you all know, I'm sure that there was assimilation, various federal policies and programs that were literally aimed at, well, it was a policy of genocide by removing the children from the Indian families and either putting them in white adoptive families or boarding schools away from their families, away from their culture, their language, their traditions, their everything. And in the late 60s, early 70s, it was up to 25-35% of all Indian children were removed from their families, and 85% of those kids were going into non-Indian families. So it was this, it was significant, obviously, and it was systemic policy of the federal government that, with lobbying by a lot of different interest groups, they convinced Congress that this had to stop, and with full bipartisan support, they did pass the Indian Child Welfare Act in 1978. Since then, it hasn't been touched, really. Now, case law, they go through the courts, help us figure out what it says, what it means, and the interpretation. But for a lot of reasons, one, is you're just not sure what they'll do with it if you go back and open it up. People are afraid to do that. And so we've been trusting more the courts and actually going back to Congress and re-looking at that. But it's been in the books in '78. And what it does, let's see, do we want the next slide yet? Yeah. It has lots of components, but the underlying principle, and this is hard for folks, for social workers and others, but the best interest of Indian children is the best interest of their tribes. Again, if you lose a generation of children, you're basically going to lose the tribe. The tribes will cease to exist. And so in non-Indian culture, when we look at best interests of children, it doesn't include Helena or even their extended family. We're looking at the kiddo, and are they thriving, and are they healthy, and are they not being beaten? And of course, in an Indian child, you want all those same things, but as far as the act is concerned, the best interest of the child is to be with that tribe, and that it is, as long as they're safe and healthy, that is where they need to be, and that is important, and it's a good thing. But it's a little different concept, and sometimes it's hard, especially with cultural differences, for the
Indian social worker to sometimes, and that's what they were doing back again in the late 60s and 70s, going, but this white home is better. This Indian child is going to be better off in this other, you know, they have more access to education and other things that are better. And they recognize through this act that is not true for the Indian children, for the tribes, for the families. So,
That's your question.
absolutely.
When you go back to number 1, on the bottom it says a child who is a member of or eligible for membership in federalized. So either they have to be enrolled. So what if they let's say I was enrolled, and I don't know what the degree is per tribe to be enrolled, but let's say.
I kind of
So
talked
let's
about
say it's I'm a quarter, and then my kids, they would be descendants of me.
I think the definition is
But if
up
they're not
here.
enrolled, do you have to be enrolled, I guess is what I'm saying.
The actual, you want to get to the definition and then I can, I think it's the next one right there. Go back. It's an unmarried person under the age of 18, either a member of an Indian tribe or eligible for membership in an Indian tribe, and the biological child of a member. That is the legal definition of when this act applies to an Indian
So
child.
does
descendant.
eligible for membership mean enrolled?
Not necessarily,
Okay.
and that's what I was going to say. But in Montana, we took a case up to the Montana Supreme Court. Our court is very favorable in interpreting the act in recognition and protecting the tribe and the intent of the act. So what they've said is membership and enrollment aren't necessarily the same thing. And so if you have a child or a parent with certain blood quantum and they can't actually be enrolled under the federal, the
Guidelines.
rules, the tribe gets to determine membership. And so it's not to the social worker or somebody else looking at, say, you are not a member of that tribe because you don't have a specific blood quantum. It's up to the tribe, so don't try to decide for yourself based on other factors if this child is a member or not. Enrollment, it has certain rules. Each tribe has their own rules.
So how do we know if ICWA applies then?
Yeah.
Is that
Well-
a determination that is made before it even
Yeah.
comes to us?
Yeah.
Well,
That, you'll see in the petition that there'll be something in there that it's believed that this child may be subject to ICWA. And,
Maybe.
and so, yeah,
So we will treat it as if they
Yeah.
are.
Well, even
exactly.
that being said, treat them as if they are, and as in any good case, you're gonna look for relatives, you're gonna look for extended family members, you're gonna work with the people around that child. So there are certain legal requirements that do apply because of ICWA, but it's not hopefully changed that much what you would do. There's legal notice requirements to the tribe, the social worker, the county attorney are responsible for those. But if there's any indication of tribal history,
Affiliation.
bug the social worker too. I do have to say, I have a case that the kids have been in care forever, since birth. One is now 14, and there's a permanency plan for the youngest, who's 14. 2 have aged out, and it says this child's Blackfeet, and there's nothing in the permanency plan about anything about and I called the social worker, and she was like, oh yeah, I guess I should contact the tribe. So, I think we're okay on that one,
But the tribe, the tribe has been involved in that case.
sort of. But yeah, but it's still, it's like we're getting to a place where we're thinking about permanent adoptive placement. We cannot stop working with the tribe and think, oh yeah, we talked to them 10 years ago, because now this kid's 14 and we're looking at, it's like, no. So, yeah, you need to nag, you need to be aware, you need to ask the questions. Hey, I see, great grandma maybe. What about, involvement with the tribe? And it may not be one tribe. It may not be 2 tribes. Maybe a lot of tribes. And under the act, there's supposed to be a dominant, a tribe that is most involved. But again, good social work, good causal work, you just focus on one necessarily. It depends on the circumstances.
So if let's say it's a Native American father and a Caucasian mother, then would the Indian child, would this
Yes.
refer to the father,
Well,
heritage?
2 things. An act applies, but order of placement preference doesn't say Indian family. So the act applies, but if the first, non-Indian grandma is in the
Is
order of
kin.
placement preference, she's close kin, so she could fall in there. So, but that's,
Okay.
gets a little dicey, so yeah, but it's, yes, the act applies, but grandma's not out of the picture, the non-Indian grandma, or grandpa oriented, or,
So could the tribe object to that?
Yeah,
If you.
yeah, but you wouldn't be outside of the law by placing a child there,
Oh, okay.
so.
So they can object to
They can
when you
intervene,
made
they
their-
can, and we hope they do, we hope they intervene, we don't necessarily.
And then if they intervene, they get.
That's the
Yeah.
other
How
good
they-
part of the act, is that the tribe has the right to intervene, a tribe has the right to ask for jurisdiction in tribal court. In certain instances, they have absolute right to have it transferred to tribal court if the child was domiciled on the reservation at the time of the incident or is a ward of the tribal court. But most of our tribes and our reservations don't have the resources, they usually don't ask to transfer cases,
So
not
that
because of
doesn't
lack of
happen a
interest
lot
though.
then.
They don't have the resources to take the case into tribal court, but they don't assume that doesn't mean they're interested. Also, not hearing from the tribe doesn't mean they're not interested, and that becomes an issue sometimes. And that is a very big problem actually, and that's why beating the bushes to say, you know, contacting tribal folks, contacting tribal relatives is very important early in a case, because as it moves along and they're waiting to see what happens, and then you get to the adoptive stage, and oh my gosh, it's not an Indian adoptive family. The tribe goes, whoa, we need to get involved now. And we found an auntie who lives on reservation, and everyone's going, but you didn't say anything. Well, they don't have to right up front. I mean, that's part of the reason a judge may not transfer or agree to the placement, but it just causes problems. So involvement early on, engaging the tribe early on, continuing to give them notice even if they don't respond, all those things are important because they're paying attention and you just might not know it. And you don't want to get down the road and then have to backtrack. And so that's,
how is it affected with, landless Indians?
I mean, not federally recognized or just landless?
Just landless, not, you know, there's a reservation that you're recognized by.
If
But
there's no tribal
landless-
court to go
landless
to, then it
natives-
would stay in state court.
It
And
would,
that is where ICWA actually applies, is when the procedure's in state court. If it's in tribal court, you can do whatever they want. If it's when it's in state court, that you have to follow these very, very prescribed, you know, priorities of placement and active efforts to keep from removing the child from the Indian home, and qualified expert witness that's qualified in the child's tribe, expertise, not just any, you know, generic,
so not necessarily the tribes are involved. If you're landless, they can go to extended family out here in the community.
but the tribe, they should have a contact person for these sorts of cases and
Do
be
you have to
engaged.
go that way?
You have to notify them, oh yeah. Absolutely, if they're a federally recognized tribe. I will also say, even if they're not a federally recognized tribe, our social workers and our county attorneys, for the most part, will still engage the tribe. Is that your experience? No, that's what I told them when I was there. It's like, yeah, legally, maybe we don't have to, but why wouldn't we? You know, you're still gonna try to connect with the tribe.
Okay, then what, if the tribe is, you contact the tribe, but the landless natives, have community, extended relatives in the community, would you go to the community first instead of the tribe?
You would,
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but they'd go to the tribe.
have to go to the tribe.
Mhm.
Even if they're not enrolled?
Well,
See, that's what I'm trying to find out. Let's say me, my grandkids.
Okay.
My boys are enrolled,
Uh-huh.
but my grandkids can't be because the degree isn't there.
But
The
they're
degree
a
of
child of an enrolled member, so this would apply.
it would, yeah.
It would
So it
apply.
still applies.
And if there's
So
a,
even if the family doesn't have any contact
it
with the
doesn't have to do with
reservation,
the actual reservation, it has to do with tribal relationship.
Are you talking about Little Shelf in specific, or what tribe?
Rocky Boy.
Rocky Boy, Chippewa Cree.
You're right.
Chippewa and Cree, yeah. They'd still apply
Oh, yeah.
for that.
So let's say something happened to my grandchildren. They're not enrolled. My boys are. How would I stand with them coming to me instead of going to the family on the reservation.
If you were interested in an appropriate, very high on the
Okay.
list.
That's
Very,
right.
very high.
Good, you hit my
Because,
question.
yeah, it's not
Yeah.
gonna be a clear cut.
Yeah, yeah, but if you're appropriate and interested, absolutely they're gonna look at you.
That's what I was curious,
Yeah.
okay, you answered it,
Yeah.
thank you.
Because what Ann said, ICWA, you know, before, prior to that, kids were just yanked out of home.
Yeah,
And, you know, but
Well, that was-
it was thought was done with the best interest in mind, even though it was maybe misguided.
Very misguided.
I have a real quick question. Are cases in tribal court when the child is on living on a reservation and they're in state court if they're in, say, Helena? Or what causes the case to be in tribal court versus state court?
If the parents are domiciled, which means they're legal residents on reservation, and the child is in their custody, then the tribal court would have exclusive jurisdiction of that case, even if they were visiting Helena when whatever happened and the child was removed.
Okay.
Left the child in the hot car, child was removed. If they lived on, say, you know, Brown, the case, the court there would have exclusive jurisdiction.
Whether
But-
they want it or not?
They could decline it and state court would keep it then,
Okay.
yeah.
But state court wouldn't be involved until they decline, right?
Well, no, if a child is removed here and you have to get
Oh,
an
okay.
emergency order from the state court,
Okay.
yeah. In some situations, if you know the child's domiciled someplace else, and it's just they're showing up and going, hey, you know, we got a call, cut it out. They don't need to go to court and get an emergency order, then there's no issue. It's just if there's an emergency removal, and it happens more in Billings when with the Crow Reservation nearby, it happens quite a bit there. So, but does that answer? Yeah, yeah. But there's no prohibition on the state court getting involved in an emergency. It's just then that they have to transfer if the child is domiciled there, or was already awarded that court for other reasons prior to this one. Then the state court can't just take it away from the tribal court. But as I said, if they live off reservation, they're removed, but they're follow that definition, the tribal court can still say we would like jurisdiction, unless there's good cause not to transfer it. The state court has to transfer it up there. So, but most of our tribal courts do not do that, for whatever reason. I think resources, just lack of funds not lack of interest. So,
Equal
next?
compliance.
We did the definition of the Indian child. There's particular preference on placement of Indian children that are a little different than the non-native. Of course, you place them in the best home, but they're more focused on kinship care also with non-Indian children now, but you have to follow a certain placement preference under the Indian Child Welfare Act, starting with the close, you know, family members, and it's just kind of a logical, and you don't need to, there's no test, you don't need to memorize what those are. Just know that there is a placement preference. It applies to, ICWA applies to any foster care placement or termination of parental rights, an adoptive placement. It doesn't apply if you have a juvenile delinquency proceeding, but if you've got a kiddo before it's, you know, like a youth in need of supervision, that level it would if they're going into foster care. That's something I think probation officers probably don't follow on a regular basis. Maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but I just don't think it comes up as often in that arena, and it should. Okay, we talked about that. Again, tribes have to get notice. They do not have to do anything with that notice. There are certain timelines when they're supposed to ask for transfer of jurisdiction or say we want to intervene. Intervention just means continue to give us notice. And social workers are told to, wise to continue to provide notice even if they're not hearing from the tribe. Document it, document it, document it. And look, I mean, if you're not hearing from the tribe, still look for placement with an extended family member. Do your own research, you know, find grandma and grandpa, auntie, uncle.
And you
then-
can go to the tribe, even if no one else is.
Yeah,
right?
oh yeah,
Okay.
houses do that, yeah, yep. And that's a good way to advocate if you don't think there's been enough query into who is available that is a, you know, extended family member kin on the, there's an Indian side of the family, non-Indian, or if they just have an Indian child who is clearly covered by ICWA in a non-Indian foster home. Because the longer the child is in that foster home, and if you're moving towards termination of parental rights, the harder it is to move them later, and that's...
You know, one of the problems we run into is a placement will be made in a non-Indian family, and the removal takes place in Helena. There's 2 foster families that are native, so the child usually ends up in a non-native family, and there may be resources back on the reservation that might be willing to take the child, but the parents are living here, and the plan is reunification, and by sending the child off to the reservation, you complicate that reunification process. Time goes by, and we end up in a termination, and then we're faced with the fact that we don't have a family that complies with the placement priorities of ICWA, and so that creates a real...
Oh, and that is a real concern, and I don't know what the answer is. Just keep the family members, you know, the family group conference, whatever they're called now, you will be invited to those. Hopefully extended family members will be there, and if that sort of situation is developing, see what you can do to bridge the communication, the distances, the visits, whatever it takes. But yeah, reunification, which is going to be the goal, and 9 times out of 10, you want the parents nearby, or if they're, you know, in jail, or you know, whatever the reason. So that's huge. And because we're so far from most of the reservations, I mean, not so far, but certainly, you know, a day or 2 usually. Why don't we go to some more? Yeah, there we go. You're stuck. All right, no, just keep going to your.
We'll just keep going?
Yeah. And then things will come up as we move through the other
Sure.
stuff.
This is something we'll leave with Bill here, and the crew is a little director of Indian Ed programs in Montana, has contact info for all the tribal councils, tribal education departments, other tribal resources. Another group that's in here, and as you brought it up, was urban Indians. And some places like Helena, Butte, Billings, Missoula, and Great Falls have urban Indian centers. And they are also another good option. So you might know somebody that's Rocky Boy, Chippewa Cree living in Great Falls. And so you have a place in Great Falls as another resource to go to for Native people. And Helena Indian Alliance, you know, it's got a lot of good caring people up there, and you know, working on good activities too. So just another partner in your efforts. I'll leave us here with you guys.
If we had a case like this, Bill, would you tell us who would be a good contact person with the tribe, or are we supposed to just start calling people?
I don't know. Which will all become clear.
Trying to exactly imagine what I'm going to actually do. So
Yeah.
I'm going to call Bill.
Yeah.
That's what I decided last week.
Yes, so early on there will be like a family preservation conference, and you'll get a lot of contacts and information.
Okay.
Yeah, things do become more clear. Still not always crystal clear, but you don't have to, like, you know, do it all on your own.
Just to show you some of the work we do at OPI, this is something we want all kids to graduate from all of our schools, whether they be in Baker, Broadus, Ekalaka, Kalispell, Missoula, Helena. The kids are all learning about culture, sovereignty, current issues, gambling, repatriation, language, jurisdiction issues. So, you know, you never know. The Indian Child Welfare Act might be covered in a government class somewhere. Some teacher talking about this. So that's the kind of stuff we're working on developing curriculum on at OPI. So kids can learn about tribal sovereignty and what are some of these issues, and how are tribes sovereign governments, and so what, and why do tribes have jurisdiction, things like this. And why does my computer have that message?
Where do you start that in school?
What's that?
How early are you starting it in
We
school?
start in kindergarten.
Kindergarten.
Yeah, we go all, I gave you the 12th grade one. This is where we want them to be after kindergarten. But, you know, I just got an email from a teacher in Wolf Point saying all their 4th grade students could label all the reservations and the tribes on them. It's like, yay, now it's in 4th grade. But they, K through 3, built that up. And their incoming 4th graders got a little pretest and asking them about that, and I was so happy to hear that.
Yeah,
Didn't
wow.
the legislature just pass something in the last few years that this education had to take place in schools?
Yes.
Okay,
Our boss's
that's
mom,
what
Carol Juneau.
Carol Juneau, got that. It had been in our Constitution since '72,
Whoa.
but nothing came of it
Not
until
then.
she pushed, exactly got funding to actually do it.
Yeah, that Indian Ed for All law got passed in 1999.
Okay.
In 1997, there was a law passed called Indian Heritage Day, where schools all across Montana do things on the fourth Friday of September. We joke around at OPI that we actually run out of Indians that day. There's not enough Indians to go out and speak in classes in schools. A lot of bad jokes.
Well, I was at lunch with our boss Denise Terrell, and we commented that Monday's a holiday, and she's like, "Oh yeah, my favorite holiday." So yeah.
You know, it's funny, South Dakota a few years ago passed a law declaring Columbus Day Indian Heritage Day there. They don't celebrate Columbus Day.
Yeah.
Hey.
And Columbus
Yeah.
did some horrific, brutal things that most Americans aren't aware of. And that's part of what we do at Indian Ed for All. We think in Columbus. You know, who discovered who in 1492?
Yeah, right.
We say Indians were here before the 6 C's. We were here before Columbus, we were here before Christianity, here before Custer, here before Costner, here before casinos, and here before commodities. We don't laugh at those jokes. But, just wanted to share some of these with you. And you've got them on that little card. And I think you printed off the essential understandings. Just to briefly remind you of these, there's 7 of them. And at OPI we have resources and lesson plans on all of these. The internet wants to come on for some reason. But, you know, this is something we do a lot with in workshops with kids. You know, what comes to mind when you hear Indians, or what do you associate with Indians, or other tribal nations, or your own tribe? And we get some interesting responses from kids. And, you know, just any ideas when you hear that word, or those terms, or?
Us?
Yeah, I'm really good at wait time and eye contact.
Oh, the word
Think of
American.
home. Think of home. What are some old stereotypes you've
Oh,
heard?
Dirty.
Montana?
Dirty.
American.
What about some good stereotypes?
Creative.
Spiritual,
Spiritual. There you go.
artistic.
Artistic.
Not hung up on stuff.
Depending on the issue, all that would apply to me. But you know, it's interesting when we throw those words out there. So just keep that in mind. You know, when you work with Native students and your own experiences and background, and just put that up because we, you know, so a lot of us grew up that first book in the middle from that Sendak alphabet
Yeah,
book.
yeah.
I for imitating Indians. Do you remember that? The
Murray
ABC.
Sendak, Where the Wild Things Are, that's he's a,
But then you see images like this, sports mascots, and Seminoles, and so you know, just keep those images in your mind, just contemporary issues, because we do see a lot of stereotypes.
well, you know, they're trying to change mascot names around the country, around Montana, from the more offensive, well, the maidens and chiefs up in Ronan still stayed. They had a major hearing on that, and the board of, school board trustees decided to keep it, but they're changing geographical, you know, mountain peaks, and rivers, and roads, and gulches, and blah, 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 blah. Trying, yeah.
Squaw word,
Yeah,
squaw
old
bill.
school.
You know, changing names of that. So we're really doing some positive things. It's like 2 schools that I was so proud of was Hot Springs on the Flathead Reservation. It used to be known as the Hot Springs Savages, and that was their mascot. And their community was controversial to change that mascot. Another community I was so glad to see change their school mascot was Red Lodge. Anybody remember what Red Lodge's mascot was? They used to be known as the Redskins. You look up the term redskin in Webster's dictionary, or Merriam's, it says offensive slang, disparaging term, derogatory term for Indians. But yet what team is in our nation's capital? Yeah, so it's a classic example of cultural hegemony. We've got lesson plans on our website if anybody's interested in learning about government, sovereignty, language issues, blood quantum, talking about who is Indians and what tribe, what enrollment criteria different tribes have. We have that on our website. Like my tribe, Spirit Lake Dakota, you have to be a quarter. Some tribes you have to be half. Some you have to be a descendant, a 16th. You know, I'm married to a non-Indian. One of my daughters is less than a quarter because I'm 7/16. and a little bit French too, a little bit of Korean Chippewa, but the tribe doesn't count certain blood. Some tribes count other sources of blood, and others don't, and so it depends. You might have a student or a kid who is full-blooded American Indian, but he might be Cree, Chippewa, Blackfeet, Crow, Cheyenne, and not have a quarter of any one particular tribal nation to be a member. I mean, he's a full-blooded Native American Indian, but yet he'd still probably qualify for ICWA, for descendancy. And
So you have, through the school, we could find out the blood degree?
It's on the OPI website.
yeah, on our website we have lesson plans where we can go look at every tribal constitution, right to the membership requirements, talk about what does it take to be a member of Blackfeet or Crow or Cheyenne. And we have students analyze that. Kids all across Montana are learning about this, which is pretty exciting. But here's some more of these examples of cultural hegemony. Everybody remember somebody saying sit Indian style? Or single file Indian style? Anybody ever say single file white guy style? Or like a bunch of, how many of us grew up playing cowboys and Indians, right? All of us, right? You know, I grew up in South Dakota on the Crow Creek Reservation. We went to a one-room schoolhouse, about 50% ranch kids, about 50% native. We played cowboys and Indians. All the ranch kids would be the Indians, all the Indians would be the cowboys. And we switch it up. I told the story before, and I always tell it to the groups I work with, Bill, so this is probably on tape from before. When I was growing up, my mom and dad worked for Catholic boarding school. My dad went to boarding school his whole life. I have an aunt who's a nun. My dad's a deacon in the Catholic Church still. They actually work for the bishop as Native American representatives. And Columbus Day in South Dakota, the bishops come into Chamberlain, have a Native American mass where they smudge, and people come in and sing ceremony songs along with the church. You know, 40, 50 years ago that wouldn't have happened. How things have shifted. You know, the church actually reaffirms Indian traditions and culture now. In the past, it used to just be total assimilation. But you know, growing up there, my mom and dad worked for the priests and nuns, and my babysitters used to be the nuns. And this one nun told me one day, it was probably about 5 or 6, he said, "Your dad's a nice Indian man." And I got all mad, and I said, "My dad's not an Indian, he's a good guy." But what kind of images that I grown up with and seen in all the books and in the movies, and you know,